Hi, parents. I don't know if we actually are live yet. It looks a little bit strange today on my screen. So anyway, I hope that you guys can see us. I hope that you can hear us. Um, let's see. So now, when we are talking about parental alienation, and especially for you guys, as targeted parents in this situation, I know that you are suffering from the worst form of pain, the worst form of attack possible. Um, actually, this look kind of strange. I don't know if this is working. Um, hey guys, if you are in the room and you can see this, can you let me know? Because my screen looks very different than any other times. But anyway, so yeah, so I wanted to talk about today is talking about the kind of experience that you guys are going through. As a targeted parent, you are being attacked every day, and I don't think what has been used out there that describe the trauma that you are going through, what they use, PTSD, I don't think is even adequate to describe what you are going through. And that's why today we are going to be talking about complex form of PTSD, and we're going to talk about trauma informed therapy. And I'm very honored today to have a special guest behind me. And also on screen, I have Dr. Lynn Koch. Hi, Lynn. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Hi, Destiny. Thank you. I'm glad it's working. I'm so glad. Hi, McLean. Thank you. Hi, Kathy. Okay, I'm glad it's working because for a moment that didn't look right. It looked kind of weird. But anyway, so today's event is being streamed and syndicated through our partner as well, which are Associação Portuguesa para a Igualdade Parental e Direitos dos Filhos, as well as Parental Alienation UK, as well as DETS, so online social hubs, and a few other partners. So thank you. My name is Petra Deeter. I'm from VictimToHero Institute, and I'm so grateful for you guys to be here. Let me know your questions. So what we have today, and we are very honored to have Dr. Lynn Koch with us. She's from University of Arkansas, and her background is in psychiatric disorder, right, as well as counseling. And she has been, so this is somebody that we are honored to be collaborating with. We're developing a trauma-informed therapy approach, trauma-informed parenting approach for targeted parents, and that's what we are working with her on this. And Lynn has a very interesting background in that she was an adult child of parental alienation. So she herself experienced parental alienation, and that was the push that made her wanted to become more aware about parental alienation, about trauma, about PTSD. And so I think the talk today, we're going to start, Lynn, with your experience as, a personal experience first, and then we'll move into and talking about complex PTSD and that kind of things. Destiny, thank you. Hi, Mary. Mary's calling from Canada. Thank you, Destiny. And you guys let us know your questions. Let us know your experience, because really, do you find that what you are experiencing is PTSD or complex form of PTSD? I mean, how are you coping? Is it difficult for you guys? I know I talk to so many parents. The kind of things that they're going through is really, really traumatic. So anyway, Lynn, so let us know, like, what was it like for you as a child experienced parental alienation? How old were you when it started? And
Okay, well, it started as far back as I can remember, because my parents, when they were married, they fought a lot. My mother in particular, we could tell she did not love our father. The way she treated him, the way she looked at him. So we had no example of loving parents. then eventually they got divorced, and we were actually relieved because of all the fighting that was always going on and just living in this kind of really unhappy, unloving household. And when they were divorced, my mother divorced my father. She got sole custody of my sisters and I. My father moved to Oklahoma, so we basically only saw him twice a year. And the kind of parental alienation I think that I experienced was not as severe as many of you have experienced, because there wasn't, we weren't caught in the middle of, custody battles. But my mother, I learned later as an adult, most likely had untreated borderline personality disorder and recurring depression. And so her moods were really unstable, and living with her was like walking on glass, or walking on eggshells all the time, because we could never predict what she was going to be like. Sometimes she could be the most wonderful, loving mother in the world, and then sometimes she could be so severely depressed that I don't think she even realized, that we were in the house. And then other times she was just had so much anger and rage and would say some of the most awful things to us that no one should say to their children. And she also had a lot of negative things to say to us about our father. So being as we only saw him twice a year, we never considered him as an important person in our life or as an influential person in our life. And usually when we saw him, it was along with other relatives.
Yeah, Lynn, I think your situation actually, and this does happen, is that your situation, the alienation started even before the marriage
Yes,
breakdown, right? So
yes.
even before she divorced him, she made it very clear to you guys that she doesn't care about your father, that your father is not somebody to be respected, right?
That's
Um,
correct.
yeah, so while they were still together, you were already made to feel like you can't really support your father in front of your mother.
Yes. And that my father, I think what happens too is, since she was the primary caregiver, we had this, twisted sense of loyalty to her, rather than to my father. And of course, when you're children, you believe what your parents tell you. You don't question it, especially when it's the primary caregiver and the other parent, you feel like has abandoned you, even though that's not really the case.
Right.
And so,
See, this is the thing. Okay. A lot of, and I see this in you, and I see it with a lot of people out there, is victim of abuse. Any form of abuse will always say that my case is actually not that bad. It doesn't matter how bad they are. I mean, I had seen victims that have their head smashed into the wall multiple times and all this sort of thing. And that's the problem with victims, is that victims of abuse will never recognize how serious the kind of abuse that they've been subjected to. So I remember a statement you made just today. You said, oh, my case of alienation is not that bad, but it's actually it's really bad. It started even when your parents are not divorced yet. You
mhm,
already been made to feel like your father was not important, that you shouldn't be respecting him,
mhm,
and you have to be loyal to her. And then it went into the divorce, where she taken sole custody and you hardly get to see your father. That's really serious. You lost this whole figure in your life that you should have. You needed
Mhm.
a father. So actually, you had a very serious problem. And then on top of that, you talk about she could get really abusive to you guys. So
Mhm.
you actually suffer this very seriously. But unfortunately, for all the victim of abuse, for some reason, victims of abuse will always under sort of like trying to undermine their suffering, and they always
Mhm.
felt like somebody else suffers are bigger than theirs. And this is part of the problem with abuse, is it shut the victims down, it silenced the victims,
Mhm.
and we learn to accept the abuse as normal. For some reason, we accept that as a sort of like just a part of our life, like a norm thing. And then also the other part of it is we learn to see ourselves for some reason not good enough, like we
Yes.
deserve this. And so that's why victims will always, you will always hear victims that say, yeah, it's not that serious, and maybe I participated in that. And the reason I'm saying that is because a lot of parents in the room right now, the targeted parents in the room, it's the same thing. They are suffering in so much pain, but still they still feel like, oh, their situation is, somehow not that bad, or they should put up with
Mhm.
this. And so we as victim don't stand up. We just kind of let the abuser getting away with it and keep pushing and pushing, and we don't set our boundaries because we somehow felt like our suffering is not that big. And I
Yes.
and yeah, so with your case, I mean, when you really look at it, it's a very serious form of child abuse. Your father was in the house and you were already being told all these things. And then the moment she got divorced, you were taken away from your father. I mean, twice a year. That's ridiculous. And then on top of that, she's still going on about how bad your father is, and she still was abusive to you.
Mhm. Mhm.
So
Yes. And those, when we talk about complex PTSD, those are also the symptoms of complex PTSD, which typically occurs when children have experienced extreme abuse and they're not able to escape it, and it's prolonged and it's interpersonal in nature. And so it's also for me, and I don't know if others of you feel the same way, but because sometimes she could be so amazingly wonderful as a parent, you begin to question yourself. And am I the problem? Am I really? I mean, the phrase I remember her using all the time is, you rotten kids. Am I really a rotten kid? Is it really me? Um, and I also, you know, took on the role that somehow I was responsible for my mother and my children, my sisters, that
yeah.
had to be the parent, but I was just a kid.
Yeah, see, that's the problem, right? You
Yes.
you so this is the other thing that abusers do, is that they will do love bombing. They will gaslight you. So then this sort of this period where you feel like you are so loved, and you craving that love and that approval in a very unhealthy way. There's that pathological
Mhm.
enmeshment that's going on. So then and then they gaslight you into feeling like, oh, it's you that the problem, it's not them. This
Mhm.
happen all the time. And I see Donna's calling here from Island. Hi, Victoria. Thank you. Victoria is saying that what I'm saying is spot on. Thank you. Laura said that children are trauma bonded and forced into loyalty conflict to choose the alienators over the loving fit parent. That's exactly the dynamic with parental alienation. Victoria is
Mhm.
calling from Australia. Hi. Destiny said we are groomed by abuser. Exactly. Victims are groomed by abusers, and we are not able to see it clearly. And even now, when we go get out of it, and we're still going, yeah, we are being abused. But it's very hard for us to truly recognize, the extent of the problem. And when we
Mhm.
don't recognize the extent of the problem, we are not standing up and fight for it properly. And then we keep giving them leeway into the abuse, so they can just getting
Yes.
away more and more. And Destiny said, yeah, we are trauma bonded to the abuser and protect them. Destiny said, children are forced to take sides and alienators badmouth the normal loving parent. Yeah, how was the bad mouthing? Like, what kind of things your mother was talking about your father?
It's hard to remember all of the things. And that's what I've learned about complex PTSD, which sounds like it's the same thing in parental alienation, is that, you kind of dissociate sometimes. But she would say things to him like he had no backbone, he was weak, he was a cheapskate. She would complain about him not paying child support and that he didn't really care about us because he wouldn't pay his child support. And even, I think more so than that, were the looks that she gave him, just these looks of contempt when they were married. She would always look at him like she just hated him. And even as a child, we picked up on that. Yeah, my sisters and I, and so, and my father, this was in the 60s, and fathers believed at that time that the way they showed love to their children was providing for them, was working all the time and providing for them. And so we didn't get to spend a lot of time with him, even when they were married. And so I never really got, fortunately, after my mother died, for about 8 to 10 years, I had a relationship with my father as an adult, and I got to spend time with him and get to know him. But even then, I saw him more as a relative that I was close with than a father figure.
Yeah, let's talk about that in a little bit. I wanted to revisit what you said earlier, though, and we'll go into your reunification with your father and how you're growing up in a second. But the other things that you mentioned earlier, I thought was really important, is that these children of parental alienation are often put into a place where you feel like you are responsible, like that the alienators are the victims, and then you as a child, suddenly there's this role reversal thing where now you suddenly, as if you're the parent that being responsible for the abuser, the alienators, that somehow their problem is yours and you have to make sure that they are okay. And this is how they got you to take on their side, because they are poor victim, and all of these adult problems that they have with your dad or your other parent, now being put as the children's problem. And then suddenly you feel like, oh, I have to take care of, for me, the same thing. I feel like, oh, I have to be responsible for my mother's feeling. She's abandoned by my father. My goodness, how dare him divorcing her? And so now I'm responsible. And I think that's the same thing you just talked about. Now you're suddenly responsible for her and your siblings, even though you are a child. So your childhood was stolen.
Absolutely, yes, it was. And that's part of trauma-focused therapy, is reclaiming, I describe it as reclaiming the pieces of myself that were stolen away from me. And that's through trauma memory processing. And so in a lot of ways, as an adult, I've been able to do that. I think some of the pain will always be there, but through a lot of therapy, trauma-focused therapy, I have really learned to, reclaim myself, and instead of reacting emotionally now, like I would as a traumatized child, I'm learning to respond as an adult. And that's been amazing to me because I was never able to do that before.
Yeah. And so this is so important for parents to recognize is that your children are going through this sort of experience where they don't get to be children anymore. And
Yes.
so some of the things that Dr. Cook and I will be talking about, not just today, we're going to come back more and more focus on the trauma informed piece. But there are two aspects of this. One is for you as a parent to recognize the trauma that you are going through so that you approach life with this trauma informed approach. And the other piece of it is how you deal with your children is trauma informed parenting, which we are going to dig in a lot more over I know the next, I don't know how long, but we have this collaborative effort that we are working on where we're going to work on trauma informed parenting. And we're going to talk a lot more about it. And maybe not a lot today, but the key thing we're talking about today is to be aware of the kind of experience that your children are going through so that you can approach them and help them because their childhood are stolen. So, and then Tina in the room said, unless you've experienced this, no one on the outside would ever understand. And I totally agree with this. This is just the worst evil form of abuse. And Claudia is calling from Texas. She said, thank you to Lynn. And I thank you, Claudia. And Laura said that the people that inflict this type of torture needs to be held accountable. We should be all outraged at this type of abuse, and that should not be allowed to continue. And I totally agree. Destiny said, God is bringing me through. Yeah, I think having faith is a very important part of the journey. And I'm not talking about, whatever form of religion or no religion, having faith, having hope, having something to hold on to and carry you through is very, very important part of this journey. Mary said, can conversion disorder be a form of abuse we suffer after a childhood trauma? Conversion disorder, I'm not sure what she's talking about. Lynn, do you know what she's talking about?
I'm not real familiar with that disorder. Can you explain what that is, please?
Yeah, Mary, if you wanted to clarify a little bit, that would be great. Okay, so let's see. I want to make sure I don't miss questions. But okay, so let's just continue a bit more before we pick up more questions. So okay, so now as a child, we've gone through a little bit about your childhood now, and we talk about how you then gone through beliefs is brainwashing and bad mouthing about your father, and your father didn't get a chance to really stand up for himself. And then going through the divorce, I mean, back then, I know there's that kind of prejudice where mother just almost always automatically given custody. So your
Yes.
father now lost you guys. And so you now hardly get to see him. But at what age did you reconnect with your father?
I reconnect. It wasn't till I was in my 40s.
Yeah. So you were in your 40s when you reconnected with your father, and this is after your mother died, right?
Well, it started before she died, but I didn't tell her a lot about, reconnecting with him because she was so possessive of me, that it would be perceived as a threat to her. And then there would be, her drama that I'd have to deal with. But we really reconnected and I started visiting him. He was living in the San Francisco area after my mother died, yes.
So you said that, so she made it very clear that she wanted you to have no relationship with him.
Well, it was interesting because when I was 15, I started having symptoms of depression. I was kind of getting unruly. I was starting to realize that she should not be treating us this way. I started standing up to her. I started self-medicating with, marijuana and other drugs. So she sent me to my father to live with him because she couldn't deal with me. But I viewed that as punishment. And so I lived with my father and my stepmother for a year and a half. And then my mother decided, she wanted me back. She had moved from Atlanta to Arizona in the meantime. And because I perceived living with them as punishment, I was horrible to them. And I think that's something that parents need to realize too, that if your children are treating you horribly, it's all part of this parental alienation problem. It's all part of complex PTSD. It's all part of feeling like I can't be good to you because that would be a betrayal of my mother. And so even then, I spent as little amount of time with my father and my stepfather as possible, and was mostly hanging out with my friends, getting high, drinking, all of those types of things, skipping school, just kind of out of control. And even with that, they didn't want me to move after I graduated high school. They wanted me to stay with them. But I did not, because I viewed this as, a punishment, a form of kind of like jail that I had to go to. I didn't want to move. I was 16 years old. I had to leave the friends that I had known since I was 5 years old. And so that did not at all help my relationship with my father.
Yeah, so I think you touch on some very important part of this whole dynamic. One is that the alienated children have been brainwashed, and it doesn't matter what age you are. Until you truly wake up, these children
Yes.
will continue carry on this narrative, and so their behavior toward you as a targeted parent is not a reflection of how they feel about you at all. They
Right.
are caught in this loyalty conflict. They have to stay true to this loyalty conflict, and they also themselves carrying this false narrative. So this is how they react, and that's the trauma response. That's how they
Yes.
respond to you. And so, for example, in the chat room, I saw Silvana said, I really need to hear this story because I'm feeling very angry at my 3 children. And this is the problem, is a lot of target parents, when they have the children with them, you already miss your children so much, and you lost the children that were loving, and then now you got these children that come back to you with so little time, and yet they defiant, they rude, they cold, they destructive, they spying on you, they badmouth about you. All this is very hard, it's very difficult. But this is part of trauma informed, is that you need to recognize that your children are trauma victims, and
Yes.
their reaction is trauma response. So you can't be angry with them. And unfortunately, it's tough, but you need to recognize your role is a parent, and your children are your children. Doesn't matter how old they are. Your role is always, always, always being the parent, meaning you have to put your children's needs first. They are trauma victims. Their needs are going to be a lot bigger than just the normal children's needs. So, if they behave a certain way, it's hard, but you don't get to respond to them in a way that is reactive, that is, and you can't turn them down, you can't shut them down, you can't destroy them. You have to nurture these victims, and they need help. That's what it is. It come down to it, is they need help. The other part that Lynn just mentioned was how you may look at how the alienators have stolen your children, and it looks like they're living this amazing life. You know, you probably see, I mean, some alienators will go out of their way, even showcasing photos and stuff on social media that just look like they're having the best time of their lives. But ultimately, behind the closed doors, your children are suffering. They don't have an amazing life at all because these alienators are abusive by nature. Sometimes it's subtle. It doesn't have to be physical abuse. It doesn't have to be sexual abuse. Sometimes it's very subtle. This psychological abuse is horrific, and your children do experience this. They do feel it. They do suffer from it. They're trying their best to survive. And at some point, alienators will turn against them. And so with Lynn's situation, her mother at some point go, I had enough. I'm going to just dump you. Go and live with your father. I don't care. Right. And they will always turn on your children at some point. So if you're standing on the side and watching it and you feel like, oh my goodness, should I just give up because, you know, my children don't even miss me, and, you know, maybe I was a not good parent because it looks like they're living such a happy life. No, if you really truly understand what's going on, your children are suffering. You know, they might look okay on the outside, but inside they really suffer. And I'm speaking to you as one of those child. Lynn, here's another child, and we're doing all these events every month for you guys with all these adult children, and you see that none of us actually get to live that marvelous lives that they seem to portray. They acted like they are just the outstanding parents, but no, they are abusing the children. So recognize that is very, very important. um, Destiny said, in my case, alienators call me mental and crazy in front of the children. Yeah, they really, yeah, they don't care. Um, okay, so let's see. Um, Destiny said, glorify himself and his side of the family and badmouth me and my entire family. Yeah, they will go and destroy the whole entire family. Kathy said that it started in the last 1 and 2 years of my 28 years of marriage, as dad secretly planned divorce, including teen sons in the plan. Yeah, that's horrible to get the children as the allies in the divorce. Yeah, it's horrible. And then the children now actively participate in that destruction of that marriage. Uh,
Yes.
it's horrible. Okay, so we talk about these things. So okay, so we got to a point. Now you're in your 40. For somebody who are really educated, you're working a professional working in this field, right, of
Mhm.
psychiatric disorders, so you know, mental
Mhm.
illness, that kind of thing. You're working with counseling, so you are fully aware, you would say, right, as a professional in this field, but you still didn't want to fully build a relationship with your dad because you were still in fear of your mother, because the drama that she would create if you try to rebuild a relationship, right? Talking
Yes.
about you're in your 40. For a professional woman, you know, you have
Yes.
a PhD, working in at
Mhm.
at a at a
Mhm.
university in this particular field. So parents, think about your children, how difficult it is. And Lynn here caught in the middle of her mother's drama that she can't just go, Dad, I want to have a loving relationship with you, because the mother was like, she only could start to have it after her mother passed.
Mhm.
That is shocking, because you just didn't want her to say all these things to you, and you feel this guilt. She was not beating you up, right?
Oh, no, no. All the abuse. She, you know, we had a roof over our head, food, all our basic needs were met. It was emotional abuse. It was, uh, I think, a lot of kind of neglect,
Yeah.
more emotional neglect, because I say when she divorced my father, it was like she divorced us too, because she spent all her time out with men, you know, and uh, so yeah, it was very difficult. And also, as you become a teenager, you start to see that, and you see how other families operate. You start to see that your mother, there's something seriously wrong going on with her. And then you start thinking about your father and you start questioning, why did he leave us with her? He knew how she was. And as soon as he left, it was like the emotional, terror that she directed at him became directed at us. And
Oh.
primarily me, as I think as the oldest child who was kind of parentified, you know.
Yeah, you were made to become the parent,
Yes.
her husband now. You're playing the husband's role for her. So you became the target for all the previous attack that was on your father is now
Yes,
directed at
yes,
you.
yes. And
Wow.
so again, that's why, um, as horrific as your children can be, and I think back and I've even apologized to my stepmother for the way I treated them when I lived with them. And she's such a loving, wonderful, kind person. You know, she said there's no need for an apology. It's like she understood automatically, but I was horrible to them. And um, but I think it's important to know that even when your children are horrible to you, they need to hear you say, I love you more than anything in the world, and there's nothing you can do that will change that. And I'm speaking from personal experience, not from my research when I tell you that. Because again, they are not living these wonderful, glorious lives. They are being treated, I think, in most cases, the same way, that at the same level as how you were treated.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah, you like how you are experiencing the alienators are doing to you, the kind of attack, the kind of abuse that you're experiencing, your children are experiencing the same type of level. And in the chat
Mhm.
room, Dan said, my ex have my kids convinced that I don't pay my child support. I opened up a case so that I could have prints out of the $250,000 I paid in the 10 years. Yeah, this is exactly what happened to your dad, Lynn, where your mother
Mhm.
convinced you guys that your dad didn't pay child support.
Mhm.
Just things that, I mean, like, why should the children be involved with money, really?
Mhm.
But so anyway, that was really important, the kind of things that you just talk about just now. And for parents to recognize that yeah, your role, and what Lynn just said about, like, no matter what, she still needed her dad to say, I love you, I love you more than anything. And so your role as parents, the targeted parents in the room, no matter how your children act, your role and your job is still to assure that you are a loving parent, that you are safe, that you are available. Those are the things that you
Yes.
have to continue to fight for, no matter how your children act. So your behavior, you unfortunately doesn't matter how much you are hurt, you need to seek the healing somewhere else. You can't be putting it on your children. What you need to do with your children is to be informed that your children are trauma victims, and your role is the parent always. And your role there is to show that you are loving, available, and safe. You
Mhm.
don't get to go, well, you're abusing me, so I'm angry, I'm going to walk away, or I'm this and I demand that. Unfortunately, you don't get to do those things. And I know it's frustrating, I know it's painful. You need to
Mhm.
get help somewhere else. And this is all a part of trauma informed therapy, is about understanding the trauma you are going through and understand the trauma that your children are going through. um,
Yes.
so anyway, Pamela said agree. Destiny says spirituality. Um, Laura said, I knew something was horribly wrong, but I did not realize the magnitude of the damage done to my children and to me. Actually, that's the thing. A lot of targeted parents don't realize, like, they experience their personal pain. They are not realizing the kind of pain that the children are going through. And ultimately, at the end of the day, this is about the children. And then she said, I was in a trance state trance-like state. Then everything became clear. What I saw, I could not unsee. Yeah, it's really bad. Tina said, I'm meeting with a state senator in South Carolina and bringing awareness to them and hoping they will guide me on what can be changed in the laws. I'm in South Carolina. Tina, could you please message us? We are launching a South Carolina. I apologize. We are launching a team there. So could you please message us, because we would love to have you a part of the team. Thank you so much. Destiny said, I was a primary caretaker too. Yes, it doesn't matter. You could have had the most close and loving relationship with your children possible. Like you guys could have been BFF, but alienators will be able to get to the children. The parental alienation, it's the way that it get to the children. It's crazy. And it feels like overnight sometimes. And it doesn't matter how close you were with your children, damage can be done and it can be horrific. Pamela said, my children are damaged age 25, 27, and treat me horribly. Yeah, there's nothing magical about the age. The children could be in their 70s and still don't recognize this. There are things that you can do to wake up the children. And we have different events that we talk about those. But the key things, though, is never, never, ever put your trauma onto the children. The responsibility for your healing is not your children's responsibility. You need to get that healing somewhere else. Okay, so we talk about your experience. So let's talk about and we kind of cover a little bit about the children's experience. Let's talk a little bit more now. We go into what kind of, what are the impact on the children, which is like for you, for example, you talk about PTSD. So let's talk about the symptoms or the implication of what you experience that are leaving the impact on you.
Okay. Well, I didn't even learn that. I thought I was just from a dysfunctional household until I went to it was a work-related presentation on suicide, no, it was on intimate partner violence and violence against people with disabilities. And they described the cycle of abuse. And they also described characteristics of women who had experienced intimate partner violence. And I was like, wow, that sounds so similar to my mother and what I went through. And that's when I decided, I had been in therapy for years, but I didn't feel like I was changing at all. So I decided to purposely seek out someone who treated trauma survivors. And so I found someone by doing, a search on the internet. I got to have a free consultation with her, and I told her my story, and I asked her, they also offered, support groups for people with chronic pain. I said, which group do you think I should join? And she said, the trauma support group. And that's where I learned about complex PTSD, and that I had that. And learning also that a lot of my strange behaviors and feelings and thoughts, other people, everyone else in the room had those. So I was not alone. And so I learned about complex PTSD, and I learned how prevalent it was.
So so let's start with PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the symptoms of PTSD, and how is that different than complex PTSD? I know you mentioned about disassociate, for example, is one of the things. What are some other things? And what is disassociation first?
Okay. Well, the only way I'll describe it with my own experience, but that's basically, it's a survival technique for children who can't escape abusive situations. So that basically they kind of, it's a shutting down. And also sometimes it can be feeling like you're leaving your body. And it's a way to cope with this trauma. That's why a lot of people, they can't remember, specific details about their experiences because they shut down literally. But just to give you an example, when I was doing trauma memory processing with my therapist, I was talking about a really traumatic experience that had happened to me. And I was talking about it as if it was something I had seen in a movie, as opposed to something that happened to me. And so I was, in that case, emotionally, I had shut down my emotions. And so she said, okay, I want you to stop. Now, I want you to take some deep breaths. The first deep breath I took, and deep breathing is really helpful for trauma processing, trauma memory processing. The first deep breath I took, all of a sudden the floodgates opened and I just started crying uncontrollably because I allowed myself to experience those emotions that I had shut down. And that's one of the first steps towards, and hardest steps towards healing.
Yeah, so with this association, what happened, like you explained, is that children, not just children, actually for targeted parents too, is that when we get into a
Yes.
place where, we feel like we cannot deal with the reality anymore, we shut down in order to cope with what's going on. And what it does is that it detaches you from fully immerse your life. You're just surviving. You're not actually there fully, so you don't function fully. And the thing about your children is that for the children is that you outsider or you as a parent will have trouble truly connect with your children because they disconnect from that reality. So understanding that is a very big part of it. And you started to talk about the trauma memory reprocessing, and you mentioned about breathing, which is to do with grounding, the grounding technique,
Yes.
right? So we'll talk
Yes.
about solution in a little bit, but let's go back to like the kind of problem. So we talk about disassociation. What about some other things? Because for example, we talk about your mental trauma is also manifest into physical form, for example, right?
Yes.
So yeah, what are some other things? Let's talk about those.
Okay. Well, first you have to understand, and I think most of you probably are pretty knowledgeable about the symptoms of PTSD. I can just read them off to you. And basically, the tool that therapists use to diagnose in the United States is called and some of you may already know this, but the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5. And it's published by the American Psychological Association.
No, psychiatric association.
Psychiatric, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
And so basically there's clusters of symptoms of PTSD, and you have to have so many symptoms in each of the different clusters to be diagnosed. Also, these symptoms have to be severe enough that they interfere with your functioning in your daily life, with your relationships, with your ability to work or whatever. And so some of those symptoms, and excuse me, I'm just going to read them off because I remember them all.
Yeah, go ahead.
Unwanted, upsetting memories, nightmares, flashbacks, emotional distress after exposure to anything that reminds you of the traumatic event, physical reactivity to anything that reminds you of the traumatic event, that you have a physical response to, kind of that fight, flight, or freeze response. Avoidance of trauma-related thoughts or feelings, avoidance of trauma-related external reminders, negative thoughts or feelings that began or worsened after the trauma, inability to recall key features of the trauma, Overly negative thoughts about oneself or the world, exaggerated blame of self or others for causing the trauma, just overall negative affect, negative, you just come across as a very negative, pessimistic person. You have decreased interest in activities that used to bring you pleasure, or being around people that you enjoyed being around. You feel isolated. You have difficulty experiencing positive emotions and feelings, irritability or aggression, risky or destructive behavior. A lot of times people might have co-occurring substance use disorders or alcoholism. Hypervigilance, which means you're constantly on alert. You're constantly scanning the environment for signs of danger. And that, your body is responding to, in that kind of state of fight, flight, or freeze. You have a heightened startle reaction, which means you might easily jump if you hear a noise. That's why we hear about 4th of July being with fireworks being so traumatizing or re-traumatizing for veterans. Difficulty concentrating and sleeping, and like I said, your symptoms cause disruptions in your life, such as in work or in your relationships. That's PTSD.
Yeah, and I think I see a lot of that in the chat room. People were saying the kind of thing that they experience. I think match with what you just talk about, and trigger, when they experience things that bring back this and the physical response, right? Like we're not even just talking about heart racing and trouble breathing, but it goes even beyond that.
Yes.
So, for example, with you have chronic pain because of PTSD. So like I'm just looking at the chat room. Let us know what do you guys experience as your personal experience, because I know a lot of you guys experience and diagnosed with PTSD because of parental alienation. And this is the thing. This is why parental alienation is child abuse and it is domestic violence, because the impact, the harm that has been done to the victims is very severe, and the action is taken intentionally. It's malicious with intent to harm. So really the whole thing, it has to be considered a form of domestic violence and child abuse. Okay, so Mark also asked whether you can talk about relational trauma. Why don't we talk about that in a little bit? Destiny was talking about fibromyalgia.
Yes. I have that.
Yeah. So you see the kind. So it's not just mentally; it manifests itself into the physical form of suffering. So okay, so that's PTSD. Now, how is that different from complex PTSD? Because we all know that PTSD is not sufficient to describe the experience that the parents are going through and the children are going through. And by the way, like I said, you might look at your children and think they are fine, but if you watch all these symptoms that Lynn just read through, you will notice this in your children. So, be observant, because even though you don't get to see your children that often, but really your children are suffering from all this. Sarah talk about in the chat room, she said she have high anxiety. And Cheryl said she was diagnosed with PTSD and she get terrible flashbacks. And I've seen parents that have trauma, like they can't sleep, they have nightmares, all of this. It's really, really serious form. And breakdown, people lose their job, they became homeless. It's very, very serious. But even then, it's still not enough to describe what they are going through, because the attack is ongoing. It's not there's nothing post-traumatic about this. This is an ongoing attack. So yeah, how is and suicide, Destiny just talked about in the chat room. So how is complex PTSD different from PTSD?
Okay, someone brought up relational trauma. And that's one of the biggest differences. And I want to read through you on this. Now, complex PTSD is not in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5, which is used in the US to diagnose these disorders. However, there are a lot of therapists out there that know about complex PTSD. It's a matter of finding one. And in fact, my official diagnosis, I've talked to my therapist, is on the books is PTSD, because complex PTSD is not considered a diagnosis in the United States. So what the differences are is, well, the International Classification of Disorders, the ICD-11, which is the manual that's used for diagnosing in other parts of the world.
Yeah, it's by the World Health Organization.
Yes, the World Health Organization. They, in their latest edition, they included complex PTSD as a sibling disorder to PTSD. And so what the difference is that in complex PTSD, it involves interpersonal trauma, okay? And it's of a prolonged, repetitive nature from which escape is difficult or impossible, okay? So that's what the main distinguishing difference is. The second difference is that in addition to all the symptoms of PTSD, people have a set of what are referred to as, well, I'll just read 3 different types of symptoms: affect dysregulation, negative self-concept, and disturbed relationships. And affect dysregulation is either hyper or hypoactivation of emotional states. Hyperactivation is exhibited by symptoms of really intensified emotional reactivity. So people who have angry outbursts, okay, over very minor things, that's an example of hyperactivation of your affect. Hypoactivation is people who either have symptoms of really emotional numbness. They really stuff down all their, and they don't have emotional responses to anything, okay? Because they've stuffed it down. And so they seem really numb, okay? Or they also may dissociate. And that's an example of hypoactivation. So that's one difference, is this difference in emotional dysregulation. Another one is people have a very negative self-concept, okay? You know, for example, for years as a child, I just thought I was unlovable, unlikable. I was weird. I felt very isolated, that I was not capable of being loved or loving other people. That I was, in comparison to other teenager, I was just, can I curse?
Yeah, go for it.
I was just really fucked up, you know? And there was no hope for me. That's how I felt. And so you have this really horrible feelings about yourself and also about the world around you. So you have these really disparaging self-evaluations and this kind of real intense self-loathing, okay? That is another symptom of complex PTSD that is not really, you know, part of the whole symptom, you know, patterns of PTSD.
And I just want to add, yeah, you're as your children being told that they are fuck up and that they are not good enough as children. And guess what? As adults now, for us, it it's still very difficult to get over that. And it
Yes.
doesn't matter how much achievement you've done, and you
Mhm.
try so hard. Actually, you try so much harder because you felt like you're not good enough. So it doesn't matter what you do. You don't feel good enough. And it's not just that.
Absolutely.
When somebody come to you and say they love you, you have trouble to believe that.
You don't believe it.
You
No.
build these walls around you. And
Mhm.
yeah, and it's
You
hard.
don't believe it's possible for anyone to love you.
Yes, and you feel like it's not real. You feel
Yeah.
that it's an illusion, that it could
Mhm.
just go away. And yeah, it's really hard to
Yes.
and so this is the kind of things that your children are going through, and probably the kind of things that you are going through now as targeted parents, to fully live your life, fully love, fully experience life. It's
Mhm.
it's yeah, this is the kind of things that you are going through and your children are going through. And so that's why it's so important for you as a parent to let your children know, to show your children love. It's so important.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm. And that brings what you're talking about, these relationships, because you have such feelings of no self-worth or that you're unlovable, you have real difficulties in maintaining sustainable interpersonal relationships. It's really hard for you. And that's associated with these feelings that you're completely socially isolated. You feel like there's no one who, could possibly feel the way I'm feeling.
No one understand you. No one could get you.
Yes, no one can understand this. Um, and you feel like you're incapable of having really fulfilling interpersonal relationships. And so what happens is oftentimes you sabotage relationships. So if you get into, in my own life, when I've been in relationships with really good, decent people, I feel like I don't deserve that. So I sabotage those relationships. And instead, I will gravitate towards relationships with people who were like my mother, because that's what I was used to. People who would just be really unpredictable. 1 minute they're madly in love with me, and then they disappear. Um, and so these are, the whole idea that the interpersonal aspect of it and the prolonged relationships that you have with abusers over an extended period of time is what makes complex trauma so different from PTSD. Because in addition to having these symptoms of PTSD, you also have difficulties with regulating your emotions. Number one, you have really negative feelings about yourself, and then you have real challenges with having relationships with other people. So those are the three things that make it different, which also means that you have to treat, when you're going for treatment from a mental health professional, you have to treat people differently who have complex PTSD. And it can be more challenging to treat these individuals. Um,
Yeah. So let's talk about, I mean, treatment. Talking about solution. I mean, I think the biggest part of this is awareness, right? Like, I mean, you and I talk a lot about
Yes.
trauma informed, like the informed piece is almost like the most critical piece. Before you go into, it doesn't matter what you want to apply in terms of solution or treatment or healing. The biggest piece here is to be informed that you are a trauma victim and your children are trauma
Yes.
victims. That's the biggest piece, right? And
Absolutely.
yeah,
It's the psychoeducation piece. So
right.
you have an understanding of why you're behaving the way you do, why you feel the way you do. It's not because you're just this hopeless fuck up. It's because you've been through this prolonged, you know, very traumatizing interpersonal trauma that you could not escape from. And it's typically diagnosed in children, but it can also be diagnosed in adults who are going through that kind of experience. And so I imagine that many of you who are going through what you're going through as adults may also have complex PTSD, just because the prolonged nature of this parental alienation and dealing with your ex-partner or spouse and the way they're treating you. And because you're co-parents, you know, you can't escape that oftentimes, I would imagine.
Yeah, the word co-parenting is a very fancy word that doesn't really work in parental alienation. If anything, it's counter-parenting or parallel
It's what?
parenting. It's either counter-parenting or parallel
Okay.
parenting that they are having to deal
Parallel
with.
parenting.
Yeah,
Okay.
because really alienators will not allow them to co-parent. I mean,
Oh, thank
ideally,
you. Yeah.
no, I'm just talking about the reality of it. Ideally, we
Yes.
want to be able to co-parent, but alienators will do everything to prevent co-parenting from happening
Mhm.
because they are out there to control, and it's all about control and power for them. So they will not allow you to co-parent with them for the children. They are not there to do anything cooperatively. It's all about, yeah. So
Okay.
anyway, so yeah,
So it's
so
counter-parenting is the term you typically use?
no, I'm just saying that's what alienators will do to you, is
Okay.
they will
Yeah.
counter parenting. So it doesn't matter what you say or do, they will disagree with you despite everything. It doesn't matter
Yes.
it's they agree with it in principle, they will still disagree with you just for the sake of disagreeing.
Yeah.
And everything will be a problem, and that's what they do. Um, so okay, so let's talk about treatment. Let's talk about solutions. So
Mhm.
the first piece is the psychoeducation, which is trauma informed education. The next piece, I think we touch a little bit on grounding. Uh, let's talk
Mhm.
about a little bit more about grounding, because grounding is so handful. It's so simple. It's so easy, and parents can use this. Like, you can do this yourself at home. So let's talk about this a bit. Like, what is grounding and why does it work, and some of the grounding techniques.
Okay. Um, Grounding is when someone has dissociated, or when they're having a really severe emotional response to what's going on. And techniques, you can also learn to ground yourself through deep breathing exercises. And that's why I told you about what my therapist did with me. She, you know, because I was emotionally detached, and part of my therapy was this, you know, really, you know, you process the trauma and you integrate it into yourself in a healthy way, so that you see yourself as, wow, I'm pretty amazing that I survived that, and look at me now. And but in order to do that, you have to emotionally connect with that experience, which is it's trauma memory processing, which is the second part of therapy. And some people never get to that point, and your therapists are not going to push you. You have to be ready for that, and you have to let them know that you're ready for that, because that is really difficult work. And so when you're doing that, so you oftentimes your therapist will use with you, and they'll teach you therapies to ground yourself. So the deep breathing. Another technique that my therapist taught me about is laying on the floor and putting my legs up against the wall and deep breathing. Also, just telling people that you are not back there when you were a child. You are in the present moment, and you are safe in this present moment. So telling them that, because they're really acting as if they are back there when they were that severely traumatized child, but they're in the present. And so reminding them of that.
So yeah, let's just go back to grounding a bit before we go there.
Okay.
I just wanted to add a few things. So like Lynn talked about, grounding is about, because you have detached yourself emotionally from the reality in a way of coping with the trauma. So grounding is about bringing you back to the present, so
Yes.
that you realize that you are not right now under attack by a bear or a tiger, that there's not a gun pointing at your head. Because when you're grounding, you realize that it's actually not that bad, it's not that serious, you can cope with today, you can, so that's the point of grounding. So one of the techniques very common, like Lynn mentioned, is breathing. But really, any kind of sensory that you have. So I have this thing that I developed. It's called the emotional toolkits. I'm going to share that with you guys soon. But the point of my emotional toolkits is to look at all of your sensory. So smell, touch, music, visual, right? So all of these things. And the other thing is to recognize that we have the left brain and the right brain, right? So it's been proven that it's associated with different things. The right brain is more analytical, and the left brain is did I say that reverse? I think I put that in reverse. I don't know, but yeah, but one of them is analytical, the other one's more emotional, right?
Yeah.
So one of the techniques for grounding is actually like your right hand, put it on the left, and your left hand put it on the right, actually, things like that. So there are things, or making sure you have a set of tools, which is music that will bring you back to where you are, songs that you like, pictures, that's what I mean, is all of your sensory smell. Some people might like lavender oil or something like that. So
Yes.
yeah, so all of your sensory, that's to do with grounding, is you want to create this set, and you want to create this set of tools that is ready for you when you get into a trauma moment. So like I'm seeing you leaning back on a pillow. You might have a pillow that you love the feel of it, right? Like
Yes.
things like that. So have this thing ready, and you know that you have it for yourself. A photo that matters to you on your phone, so you can pull up when it's time that you really need that. Things like that. So have your tool set ready, so that when you get triggered by some kind of trauma situation, you can pull yourself back. You can, whatever it is. But the point is looking at, and the thing is, you can't use the same thing over and over again. So be prepared and keep alert of, oh, there's a new song I just heard. It seems, keep it in mind, so that you have backup, so that if something doesn't work, you can have something else that you can use.
Yes.
So yeah, so that's I wanted to add that in terms of grounding. So okay. Yeah.
Can I add on another great
Yeah.
technique? Is petting. If you have pets, petting your dog is a great way to, or your cat.
Yeah.
Holding them and petting them is a great way to ground. And I do that a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's why these, now they start to recognize a lot more the emotional support
Yes.
animals, is because, yeah, that's the other part about it is, and there's a book, and I talk about it a lot. It's called The Body Keeps the Scores by,
Yes.
Dr. Basil Vanderkock.
Yes.
And yeah, and if anyone can get him on this show, please let me
Oh,
know. I mean,
yes.
yes, I mean, he was supposed to do an interview with us this summer, and now it's like it looks like it's not happening. So anyone that can get him, please just knock on his
Oh,
door and tell him we need him here. But anyway, one of the big things that you talk about is like emerging yourself with visceral experience that is empowering. Meaning, like you talk about, so one is like having a pet or having the people that assure you that you are safe, you are here
yes.
now, you are loved, you are, having that kind of empowerment is so important. So, the thing with the pet is that it's truly the form of unconditional love, because your
Hmm.
pets don't demand anything. They are there, they're always there for you. And so having that kind of assurance is so important, because we have been all of that had been taken away from us through the trauma. Yes, I know, they are not mine, but I'm borrowing them right now. The Cheryl was saying, "Look behind me." Yes,
Yeah.
I have two. Yesterday, I have another one too. So beautiful, this dog. Oh my god! I was joking that's he's my new boyfriend. But yes. So anyway, yes. The thing about this is it's so important to have that kind of empowerment again, where either people or animals or someone that assure you that you're safe now, you're
Hmm.
you're you're loved, you're safe, this is not going anywhere, they're not demanding you unreasonable things, that you are good enough, right? Those things are
Yes.
so big part of the healing, of the recovering, right?
Yes. And you talk about empowerment. When you can learn, I'll tell you a story. It was several months ago, but I sometimes have, panic attacks, which probably you all can relate to. But one time I was actually able to use breathing techniques to bring myself out of the panic attack. And I had never done that before. That was so empowering to know that I had the capability to take care of myself and to, ground myself. And, it took a while, but I did it. And it was so I can't tell you how empowering it was uh,
Yeah. And
to be able to do that.
that's a big part of also about trauma informed, is knowing that you are a victim of trauma, and you know that you can take yourself out of that place. Because if a lot of people, the natural response when they, for example, when they feel sad, is they listen to sad music, and then it just get dragging them down and dragging them down, and I don't know why, but somehow it always feels soothing, but really it's not helping yourself, right? So you're already feeling down, like you're suffering, and then now you listen to sad music, and you listen to even more sad music, and you keep doing it, and you just get stuck in that place. So one of the big part about being trauma informed is knowing that no, you have to be responsible for getting yourself out of there. So for you applied your breathing technique.
Yes.
So Dan in the chat room said he went for pedaling, or Destiny said, nature walks, things like
Yes.
that, right? So things that putting you out, give yourself the chance to get out of there, and being proactive in your own rescue. Yeah,
Hmm.
so that's a big part of it. um I think we're gonna come back, because like we do plan this as a series. We're gonna come back with more specific things in the future, and we'll do a session about parenting, trauma informed parenting, and another one about trauma informed like healing for targeted parents. I think we'll do more in depth. But I think today we run kind of like long enough now. Before we go, do you want to just kind of add a few final thoughts before we'll come back next time and go more into it? Oh, and Cheryl said painting, yes. And Mary said
Oh,
she
yeah.
played with music. She played with my saxophone every day. That's awesome. Cheryl said horses are excellent. Yeah, really.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, all of these things are so important, so important. And knowing that you have to deal with this, because so this is the thing. Sometimes, especially for targeted parents that are in the middle of this mess, sometimes you're being dragged through the mud in the middle of the courtroom. Okay, so you don't get out of there and go for a nature walk. You have to deal with it right then, right then. And so the informed piece is so important, and having this emotional toolkit. So for example, like having something on yourself, like a ring where you designated it as your rescue spot, right? So that when you feel something, you're like, okay, I'm gonna hold on to this. It's up to you what it is, whether it's put your hand here, whatever it is. The point is being trauma informed so that you know you can create your own toolkit, and it's only for you, specifically for
Yes.
you. No one else know it. And you can get to that place where you can recover quickly. Like Cheryl talked about visualization. Yes, that's a very important piece. Like, where is your safe place? Is it, like by a waterfall? Is it by a, big grass area? Is it, at home in front of a fireplace? Is it with someone in particular? Is it their hug, whatever it is, right? Having that toolkit with you, because sometimes you don't get to walk away and you need to recover quickly to handle your situation, especially if you're fighting in court. You have to deal with it right then and right there. Or if you have your children for a very short time and then your children's reacting, you don't get to walk away. You have to respond right then and right there. So have that toolkit. Cheryl talking about elastic band on your wrist. Yeah, like it could be that. Whatever it is for you, figure it out for yourself, but be conscious that you need to have like refreshing this toolkit all the time, because you can't use the same thing over and over again. Some things will work for a long time, but a lot of things you will have to replace it. You can't play the same song over and over again. Maybe after 200 times, it's going to get tiring, right? So whatever it is, sometimes it's a particular movie or whatever, but yeah, have that toolkit for yourself but look at all the sensory that you have, music, sound, visual, touch, smell, all of those things.
Yes.
It's going to be important. Yeah. Yeah. Do you want to add something else before we go? Yeah.
One thing too, I know that I read about a few years ago, is that victims sometimes, and I don't know if this, would apply in, I guess, family courts, but victims of crime sometimes they will allow dogs in the courtroom so that people can pet the dogs, while they're,
Yeah.
they're the perpetrator, to soothe them. Another thing I learned, from my therapist, is the importance, after you have these, traumatic experience, going to court, that's traumatic.
Yeah.
Is do something self-soothing afterwards.
Yeah. Reward yourself, because
Yes.
what you are dealing with is horrific, and
Yes.
just surviving it, just showing up is a lot. So give yourself the credit for what you are doing. So really give yourself your time, give yourself
Yes.
your break. Yeah. Really, really important. And surround yourself with people that care about you, people that love
Absolutely.
you, building that support system. So all of that is very important. And like I said, we're going to come back and dig into this a little bit more structurally, for both in terms of parenting and also for you as cell healing. And we have a few papers that we're going to be publishing. So we're looking forward to share with you guys this work that we do, right? And then also Laura said, how is the system getting away with condoning this type of abuse? Okay, so this is the thing. The system, when we say the system, what we're looking at is we essentially saying, oh, it's something out there. I think that we as victims, or survivor, or whatever you want to call it, we have to take responsibility. The system is us. We have to make the change. And this is why you guys, I need your support. We are fighting as anywhere that we can. So wherever you are, you want the system to change, let's change it together. Okay, let's not just look at it as something that is beyond our reach. We can make the difference. So let's do this. So in particular, I want to say I'm heading to Texas. We are fighting like hell in Texas. So if you guys want to help in Texas, you guys know anyone in Texas, it doesn't have to be Texas, but anywhere, we'd love to hear from you. But in particular, I'm heading to Texas soon, and we have a lot of things going on in Texas. So if you guys know anyone in Texas that could help, anyone want to support in any way, even in front or behind the scene, please let us know. We're trying to reach out to as many organizations in Texas as possible. So thank you so much, and thank you. You guys have an amazing evening. And this week, on Friday, we have a very important event. It's by the American Bar Association. We have 2 judges and 2 amazing lawyers talking about fighting parental alienation. We have the privilege of having the permission from the Bar Association for this event. So watch out on Friday. And if you're not already on our mailing list, please join the mailing list. It's on our website at VictimToHero.com. And then join our mailing list so that we can inform you of whatever we're doing. Edwin is asking, what are we fighting for in Texas? We are fighting for the law to change. We want parental alienation to be recognized as child abuse, and we want it to be recognized as domestic violence. We want custody interference to be punished. So anyway, there's a lot of things that we are fighting in Texas. We're looking for resources for parents. We want, somewhere that victims can get help. We want somewhere so the children can be rescued. So we're fighting so many things. No, not just 803. 803 is one of the 4 bills that we're pushing this year. But right now, 4240, House Bill 4240. I'm not watching right now because I'm on this event, but we've been watching every day. And this is the last bill that we have in Texas. HB 4240 is to do with custody interference in Texas. Edwin's asking, by the way. But yeah, so that's the bill by House Rep Raymond. It went through the House. It went, and we are grateful. It went through the Juvenile Justice and Family Issues. It went through the House. It went into the Senate. It went through the State Affairs Committee in the Senate, and now it is sitting, waiting, supposed to be heard in the Senate. We don't know if it's going to get heard, because if it doesn't get heard, I mean, we're out of time. We're running to the end of time. Monday is the very last day of the legislative session. So we are holding our breath, but that's what we're doing in Texas. But even Monday is not the end of it. We are we ready to work for the next session. So that's what we're doing in Texas. We have a lot to do. Don't know. Could you don't just wrote about a group in Texas. Could you please message me? Anyone have information in Texas? I want to hear from you, especially if anyone have a way to help us to reach Child Protective Services. We want to talk to them. So anyone have any contact directly, indirectly, please let us know. Thank you so much, you guys, and have an amazing night. Stay wonderful. You guys are much stronger than you give yourself credit for. So anyway, sending you love. Really talk to you guys very soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we are offline.